Walking into a gym on your very first day, you finally mustered the courage to, change your lifestyle.
Right, which is huge.
It is. And you're probably already feeling a bit self-conscious, like a little out of your element.
Oh, absolutely.
And what's the very first thing the professional trainer does? They sit you down, pull out a pair of cold metal pincers, and literally pinch the fat on your stomach.
Yeah, the dreaded calipers.
Exactly. Then they put you on a treadmill, crank the incline, and push you until you feel like you're going to throw up.
Which is just awful.
It is. For decades, this wasn't just like a common hazing ritual. This was the absolute gold standard for a fitness assessment.
It's horrifying when you frame it that way, but that is exactly how the industry operated for a very long time.
Like you're a machine or something.
Right. You treat the human body like a broken car engine that needs to be diagnosed rather than, a person who is trying to build a better life.
And usually when we talk about diagnostics, we actually crave that cold, hard precision.
I do.
Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line. The doctor points to it and says, there it is.
It's clean.
Right. It's binary. And honestly, it's comforting.
Because we love categorization.
Right.
We want a clear metric to define a problem so we can apply a clear solution.
But when you step into the world of fitness assessments, that clinical x-ray approach totally backfires.
Oh, completely.
Instead of illuminating a path forward, that magnifying glass is suddenly pointed directly at your deepest insecurities.
Yeah, it's rough.
Whether it was that dreadful high school PACER test, the one.
Everyone knows the PACER test.
Right. Where you felt like your lungs were going to explode while your peers watched you fail. Or like an intimidating personal training intake as an adult.
Just feels like judgment.
Exactly. It almost always feels like judgment.
It feels like an indictment, really. It highlights every missed workout, every structural imperfection, every bad habit you have. And that brings us to the core philosophy of what we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into a comprehensive approach called client-centered assessment.
And the fundamental premise here is a total paradigm shift.
Total shift, yeah.
We are going to explore how modern fitness and health professionals measure the human body, but we are flipping the script entirely.
Right. The mission is not to judge.
Exactly. It is to safely, accurately, and uniquely prescribe a path to better health. We're moving from a system of exclusion and judgment to one of empowerment.
And the foundational rule of this modern approach is something that sounds almost, counterintuitive for an assessment manual.
Which is?
That fitness testing is never an end in itself.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Well, pushing an out-of-shape, low self-esteem client into a battery of exhaustive physical tests can just obliterate whatever fragile motivation they managed to scrape together, just to walk through your door.
It is arguably the worst first impression you could possibly make.
Seriously.
You are basically confirming every fear they had about exercise being painful and humiliating.
Exactly. If the first interaction involves probing, prodding, and inducing severe fatigue, that client is going to leave with less resolve than they had when they arrived.
Right.
The client-centered paradigm dictates that we have to adapt the science to the human being, not force the human being to conform to the science.
Adapting the science to the human. I want you, the listener, to really keep that phrase in mind because it is going to dictate everything we talk about today.
It's the whole foundation.
Right, because before anyone even thinks about breaking a sweat, before we measure how far your personal engine can drive, we have to figure out if that engine is going to blow up the second we turn the key.
Which is the health screening part.
Exactly, the pre-game. Let's look at that. For years, the industry used a gatekeeper tool called the PARQ, the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire.
And man, that original PARQ was incredibly strict. It was essentially a liability shield. If you ticked certain boxes, maybe you had a slightly elevated blood pressure reading, or you were over a certain age, the questionnaire acted as a hard stop.
Like a wall.
Exactly. You were told, go get a doctor's note before you can use this treadmill.
Which is just a massive barrier to entry.
Oh, huge.
Think about it. You finally decide to work out, you show up, and they tell you to go schedule a doctor's appointment, pay a copay, wait 3 weeks to be seen, get a piece of paper, and come back.
Yeah, most people are just going to say, forget it.
Right. They just go back to the couch. It's like a bouncer at a club. The old PARQ bouncer looks at your ID, spots one gray hair, and immediately says, nope. No entry without medical clearance.
Because they are terrified you're going to collapse on the dance floor.
Exactly. But the research caught up with that overly cautious approach, right?
It did. The modern screening tool is called the PARQ plus, and the plus represents a massive philosophical and scientific update. It acknowledges a reality that we chronically ignore, which is that the risks of inactivity are vastly, astronomically greater than the risks of acute exercise.
So the new bouncer actually wants you inside the club.
They desperately want you in the club.
That's great.
The modern data proves that it is far safer for you to be inside dancing, even if you have controlled conditions like hypertension or type 2 diabetes, than it is to be out on the dangerous street of a sedentary lifestyle.
Wow, okay.
As long as you are asymptomatic, the new protocol wants you moving. The major causes of disability and death today aren't things you catch in a gym.
Right.
They are diseases of lifestyle.
We have this strange societal cognitive bias. We treat exercise like this highly dangerous medical procedure that needs strict clearance.
We really do.
We view the acute stress of exercise, the sweating, the elevated heart rate, the muscle fatigue as a disruption of our baseline, so it feels risky. But we don't require medical clearance to sit at a desk for 12 hours a day, right? We view sitting still as safe because nothing acute is happening in that exact moment.
And that is the silent trap. The chronic deterioration caused by inactivity is the true crisis here.
Yeah.
And the modern assessment actually turns that lifestyle into a quantifiable equation. It introduces something called the Physical Activity Index, or PAI.
I love when abstract concepts get turned into hard math. How does the PAI actually work?
It breaks down your habits into 3 variables: intensity, duration, and frequency.
Okay.
You multiply those 3 together to get your score. So let's say you exercise at a moderate intensity. The scale gives that 3 points.
Got it.
You do it for 40 minutes, which is another 5 points. And you do that 4 times a week, which is 4 points. Multiply 3 by 5 by 4, and you get a PAI score of 60.
Okay, and what does a 60 actually mean? Is that good?
Yeah, a score between 60 and 99 is categorized as good, indicating that your current lifestyle is actively conferring considerable health benefits.
That's really clear.
Right, but the assessment goes beyond just your heart and your habits. It brings in a tool called RISC-1.
Which is a delightfully on-the-nose acronym.
It really is. Now, typical risk assessments just look at coronary heart disease factors, right? Like age, family history, smoking status, cholesterol.
The usual suspect.
Exactly. But RISC-I expands the definition of risk to include musculoskeletal health. Specifically, it assesses the vulnerability of your lower back and your knees.
That makes total sense. I mean, you can have a heart that pumps like a champion racehorse, but if your knees are completely destroyed, your ability to maintain that cardiovascular health is going to plummet.
Yeah, you're stuck.
You can't separate the engine from the chassis.
You really can't. And to look at the whole picture, professionals also utilize tools like the Fantastic Lifestyle Checklist.
Another great acronym.
Yeah, it covers everything from family and friends to sleep, stress, and nutrition. It forces the practitioner to recognize that you aren't just a collection of muscles and blood vessels.
Right.
You are a human being dealing with life.
But all of these questionnaires, the math, the acronyms, they're just pieces of paper.
Ultimately, yeah.
And the guidelines make it very clear that paper cannot replace human intuition. The professional has to practice active personal observation.
And this is where the art of assessment really begins. You can't just blindly read a form and tick boxes.
Right.
If a client checks no on every risk factor, but they are sitting across from you with labored breathing at rest, or they have a persistent rattling cough.
Or they're swollen.
Exactly. You notice swelling in their ankles, the paper doesn't matter. The observation supersedes the questionnaire.
Or like if they show up smelling like cigarettes and admit they just had a massive lunch, even though you explicitly told them to fast.
Oh, that happens all the time.
You can't just push through the protocol for the sake of the schedule. Right. You have to cancel or postpone the test.
Which brings up the concept of informed consent. We typically view consent forms as just legal jargon designed to protect the facility from lawsuits. But a client-centered approach reframes the consent document as a tool for empowerment.
It's about building trust then.
Exactly.
The language suggested in the protocol is actually brilliant. It explicitly tells the client, you are encouraged to do the best you can on these tests, but never push yourself to a point of overexertion or beyond what you think is safe.
Yes.
It literally hands the locus of control right back to the person taking the test. It says, you are the boss of your own body.
That psychological safety is paramount. because once they feel safe, then we can actually start measuring.
Okay, so the bouncer had let you into the club, you've signed the consent, you feel safe. Now it's time to look under the hood and measure that aerobic engine.
Right.
But we don't just randomly throw you on a treadmill and hit the start button. The professional has to open up their tool belt and choose the right weapon.
And choosing the right assessment tool means balancing what we can call the holy trinity of testing criteria. Okay. Validity, reliability, and economy.
Let's break those down because they are crucial to understanding why certain tests are used and why others are completely discarded.
Sure.
Let's start with validity. Does the test actually measure what it claims to measure? The research makes a fascinating distinction here between content validity and construct validity.
Right. So content validity is fairly simple. If a test claims to measure how many push-ups you can do in a minute, and you count push-ups for a minute, that test has content validity.
It represents exactly what it claims to.
Yes.
But construct validity is wild. It deals with hypothetical constructs.
Things you can't see.
Right. Things that you know exist, but you can't physically see or touch. The classic examples are intelligence or anxiety.
Right.
You can't open up someone's brain and weigh their anxiety.
Right.
You have to infer it based on how they answer questions or react to stimuli.
And surprisingly, aerobic capacity, your cardiovascular fitness, is treated as a hypothetical construct.
Wait, really? Yet think about it. I can't just look at your chest and see your aerobic capacity. I can't measure it with a ruler. I have to infer it. I have to measure your heart rate response to a specific workload and construct a mathematical reality based on that data.
Which is why reliability is the second and arguably most fragile pillar.
Exactly.
Reliability is consistency. If I measure your fitness today and I measure it again tomorrow, assuming your actual biology hasn't changed overnight, I should get the exact same score.
But the biggest threat to reliability isn't the equipment, it's the human running the test. Intertester reliability is a massive problem.
So like if I'm your trainer today and I motivate you by yelling and cheering, you might push harder.
Right, I get hyped up.
But if another trainer tests you next week and they just sit there silently checking their phone, your performance is going to drop.
Dramatically.
Your biological fitness hasn't changed, but your score has. So the test is unreliable unless the administration of it is flawlessly standardized.
Exactly. And the final pillar is economy.
Right. You might have a laboratory test that is perfectly valid and perfectly reliable. It measures the precise gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your breath.
The gold standard stuff.
Right, but if that equipment costs $40,000, requires a PhD to operate, and takes 3 hours per client,
then no one is going to use it.
Exactly. It has terrible economy. It is useless for 99% of the population.
So we have to balance validity, reliability, and economy. And when we look at testing the cardiovascular system, we have a few standard protocols: treadmills, bicycles, step tests, and arm ergometers.
Right.
But you don't just use whatever's available. The specific tool has to match the specific human.
A treadmill will generally yield the highest measurable oxygen uptake. Humans are built to walk and run. It utilizes the largest muscle mass in the body.
Okay.
So if you want the absolute highest number, you use a treadmill.
But treadmills are not for everyone.
Far from it. If you have a client who is severely overweight, or someone who has a history of knee trauma, or even someone who just isn't coordinated enough to walk on a moving belt without holding on for dear life.
Oh man, the death grip on the handrails?
Yes. If they're doing that, a treadmill is a terrible choice. The anxiety alone will spike their heart rate, totally ruining the data.
So for them, you use a bicycle ergometer. It supports their body weight. There's zero impact on the joints, and they won't fall off if they lose their balance.
You're adapting the science to the human.
Now, regardless of the machine, we have to talk about how hard we push the client. And this is where we get into the critical difference between maximal and submaximal testing.
Right.
If you watch like a sports drink commercial, you see professional athletes hooked up to tubes, running on a treadmill until they literally collapse in a puddle of sweat.
Yeah, that is a maximal test. They are finding the absolute ceiling of the human engine.
And in a clinical research setting, or for an elite athlete, that is sometimes necessary. You are measuring their true VO2 max.
Let's actually define VO2 max, because it gets thrown around a lot in fitness culture.
Yeah, what is it biologically?
VO2 max stands for the maximum volume of oxygen that your body can consume and utilize during intense exercise.
So it's not just lung size.
No, it's not just about how deeply you can breathe. It's about how efficiently your lungs pull oxygen from the air how strongly your heart pumps that oxygenated blood through your arteries.
Okay.
And crucially, how well the mitochondria inside your muscle cells can extract that oxygen from the blood to create ATP.
Which is cellular energy.
Exactly. It is the ultimate metric of aerobic health.
But finding that absolute ceiling is dangerous. For a regular person off the street, pushing them to their maximal limit dramatically increases the risk of an adverse cardiac event.
It's very risky.
It requires immense supervision, usually a physician on standby, and honestly, it's just incredibly miserable for the client.
Which violates our core rule of not destroying their motivation.
Right.
So instead of a maximal test, modern protocols rely on submaximal testing. We don't need to push you to the breaking point.
Thank goodness.
We can just monitor your heart rate at a moderate submaximal workload and use math to predict where your ceiling is.
We can extrapolate the data. One of the most fascinating field tests for this is called the Rockport 1 Mile Walking Test.
Yes.
It is incredibly economical. You don't need a lab. You literally just need a flat track, a stopwatch, and a heart rate monitor.
The protocol is simple. The client walks 1 mile as briskly as they possibly can. The moment they cross the mile mark, you record their exact time, and you immediately take their heart rate.
And then you plug those two numbers into an equation. But it's not just time and heart rate. The formula to predict VO2 max from this walk is wild.
It's very comprehensive.
It factors in your weight in pounds, your age in years, and even your gender. The math literally assigns a value of 1 for males and 0 for females as a coefficient.
Right.
It mathematically triangulates your fitness based on how hard your heart had to work to move your specific body mass over a fixed distance in a specific amount of time.
It's a beautiful piece of applied physiology.
But hold on. I'm looking at the underlying assumptions of submaximal testing, and I see a massive friction point here.
Okay, what is it?
The math assumes a perfectly linear relationship between your heart rate and the work you are doing. But the research explicitly notes that a highly trained runner has incredible mechanical efficiency. They glide, they waste zero energy.
Right.
Meanwhile, a sedentary client who never exercises is going to have a choppy, inefficient stride. They're bouncing up and down, their arms are flailing.
And lots of wasted movement.
Their heart is working overtime just to stabilize their wobbly chassis, not just to move forward, so their heart rate is going to be artificially high. Doesn't this mean the test is inherently biased?
Well,
It overestimates the fitness of the fit person, and it punishes the unfit person by underestimating them.
that is a phenomenal observation, and you're absolutely correct. The test is biomechanically biased.
Wow.
The absolute number that predicted VO2 max has a significant margin of error based on movement efficiency.
So why do we use it? If the number is wrong, isn't the test useless?
Because the absolute number isn't the point. Think about the overarching goal. We are measuring progress, not qualifying someone for the Olympics.
Okay, I see.
If you take that same sedentary client and you have them do the Rockport test again after 6 weeks of training, their stride might still be a little choppy.
Right.
But if their heart rate is lower at the end of the mile, that proves their engine has improved.
So the absolute accuracy of the prediction matters less than the relative trajectory of their progress.
Exactly.
As long as you use the exact same flawed test every time, the change in the score is 100% valid.
Precisely. You are establishing a personal baseline.
Okay, so we've tested the engine, we know the aerobic capacity, but all of that cardio capability is useless if the machinery carrying it is compromised.
Right, the chassis.
You can have a V8 engine, but if it's sitting inside a rusted out chassis, you aren't going to get very far. Which brings us to the most emotionally charged, sensitive part of any assessment.
Body composition.
The mirror, the scale, and the calipers.
And the manual outright acknowledges that the general public has an absolute obsession with body image. We place immense social and psychological weight on our physical dimensions.
Which is why, as a practitioner, you have to tread incredibly carefully here.
You really do.
When we talk about body composition, we are fundamentally dividing the body into two compartments: fat mass and fat-free mass. Everything that isn't fat, muscle, bone, water, organs is fat-free mass.
And the most common metric people want to know is their percent body fat.
Oh, yeah.
To give you some baseline context, for adults between 18 and 34 years old, the normative ranges are generally 13 to 22% for men and 28 to 35% for women. Women naturally carry a higher percentage of essential fat for reproductive and hormonal health.
But how do we actually find that number? If you go into a commercial gym today, you'll probably see a machine with silver handles or a fancy scale you stand on barefoot.
Right, that is called BIA, bioelectrical impedance analysis.
It sounds incredibly high-tech.
It does, and the mechanism is brilliant in theory. The machine shoots a harmless, invisible electrical current through your body.
Okay.
Now, electrical current travels very easily through water, and your fat-free mass, your muscle tissue, is full of intracellular water and electrolytes.
Right.
Fat tissue, on the other hand, contains almost no water. It acts as an insulator.
So the machine measures the impedance or the resistance to that electrical flow. Less resistance means more muscle. High resistance means the current is hitting a lot of fat.
Right. But here is the fatal flaw with BIA. Because it relies entirely on water conductivity, it is wildly sensitive to your hydration levels.
How so?
Let's say you drink a ton of coffee, which is a mild diuretic. You skip breakfast and you go to the gym for your assessment. You are slightly dehydrated.
Your body literally has less water to conduct the current.
Exactly. So the electrical current faces more resistance.
Oh?
And because the machine is just a dumb calculator...
So it doesn't know you just had coffee.
Right. It misinterprets the dehydration-induced resistance as fat tissue. The machine literally thinks you are fatter than you actually are just because you didn't drink a glass of water.
Imagine the psychological damage of that.
It's terrible.
A client has been working hard, they step on the scale, and the machine tells them they gain 2% body fat. It's entirely false, but it destroys their motivation.
Which is why strict pretest conditions like no caffeine, no exercise prior, normal hydration are absolute prerequisites for BIA.
If BIA is that finicky, what about the other methods? For a long time, the gold standard was hydrostatic weighing.
Underwater weighing. It's based on Archimedes' principle of fluid displacement and body density. Muscle sinks, fat floats.
But think about the reality of this test. You are asking a client who is already self-conscious about their body to strip down to a bathing suit, get into a literal tank of water, submerge their head, and forcefully exhale absolutely every ounce of air from their lungs while underwater and hold still while you weigh them.
It is the absolute antithesis of a client-centered approach.
It sounds like torture.
The anxiety, the discomfort, the sheer panic of exhaling underwater, it invalidates the whole experience for the average person.
So we drop the water tank and we pick up the skin fold calipers, the classic pinch test.
Skin fold calipers, when used by a highly trained specialist, are surprisingly accurate. They operate on the principle that the amount of subcutaneous fat, the fat directly under your skin, is proportional to the total amount of body fat.
Okay.
The research cites an error range of roughly 3.7% for generalized equations.
But let's look at that caveat. When used by a highly trained specialist,
Right.
we are back to the intertester reliability problem.
Oh, big time.
If I pinch your tricep, I might grab a little bit of muscle along with the fat. If I pinch too hard, the fat compresses. If I pinch a millimeter to the left of where the formula dictates, the math changes. Human error is massive.
And beyond the error, it's invasive. It requires physical contact, often in sensitive areas like the abdomen or the thigh.
Which leads us to the most ubiquitous and arguably the most misunderstood metric in the world, BMI, the body mass index.
Every doctor's office uses it. It is incredibly simple to calculate. You take your weight in kilograms and you divide it by your height in meters squared.
Let's talk about that math because that is where the whole system breaks down. BMI was invented in the 1830s by a Belgian astronomer named Adolphe Quetelet.
An astronomer.
Yes, he wasn't studying health. He was trying to define the statistical average man. And the fatal flaw of BMI is right there in the formula, the square of the height.
Explain how that breaks the metric for you.
Human bodies are three-dimensional objects. We have volume, but BMI only squares the height. It treats us like two-dimensional rectangles.
Right.
If you scale a human being up in height, their mass increases cubically, not squarely. This means the math inherently punishes taller people, classifying them as heavier than they actually are proportionally.
That makes sense.
But even worse is the muscle mass issue.
Right. The formula has no idea what that weight is made of. It cannot distinguish between a pound of fat and a pound of dense muscle.
So if you take an elite 220-pound professional football player who is incredibly lean and packed with muscle, the BMI calculation will categorize him as obese.
Exactly.
It's a proxy metric and a highly flawed one for individuals.
Which is exactly why the modern assessment protocols state that BMI is totally insufficient on its own. It must be paired with another measurement to provide context.
And what's that?
The most vital contextual measurement is waist girth.
Just a simple tape measure around the belly button?
Because the tape measure solves the great divide in body fat. Subcutaneous fat versus visceral fat.
Subcutaneous fat is the stuff you can pinch. It's the fat that covers your abs or sits on the back of your arms. It is what clients hate looking at in the mirror.
Right.
But biologically speaking, subcutaneous fat is relatively benign.
The true killer is visceral fat. This is the deep fat.
Yeah.
It packs itself tightly around your internal organs, your liver, your intestines, your heart.
Yikes.
A generalized pattern of subcutaneous fat carries vastly less risk than a localized visceral distribution of adipose tissue in the trunk.
Because visceral fat isn't just sitting there, it is metabolically active. It releases inflammatory cytokines directly into your system.
Exactly.
It is the primary driver of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease.
And a simple waist girth measurement is a highly reliable proxy for visceral fat.
Okay, what are the numbers to look out for?
The critical thresholds for a massive jump in health risk are a waist girth greater than 102 centimeters, about 40 inches for men, and greater than 88 centimeters, about 35 inches for women.
So you could have a client with a BMI of 28, which is technically overweight, but if their waist girth is small, their actual metabolic risk is low. They just have a lot of muscle.
Right.
Conversely, you could have someone with a normal BMI of 23, but they have a large waist girth. They are what the industry sometimes calls skinny fat. Their risk of disease is actually terrifyingly high.
And this data leads us to one of the most profound realizations in the entire assessment protocol. When you look at all these numbers, the percentages, the BMIs, the percentiles we are obsessed with, comparing ourselves to normative data.
We want to know if we are above average.
We want to see where we rank in the tribe.
Exactly.
But the research explicitly states that comparing a client to normative data is often destructive to behavioral change.
How so?
Think about a severely obese client who works incredibly hard for 6 months and loses 30 pounds of pure visceral fat. Physiologically, they have saved their own life. Their metabolic markers have improved drastically.
It is a monumental victory.
But if you take their new body fat percentage and compare it to the normative data of a 25-year-old athlete, they are still going to rank in the bottom 5%.
Oh, wow.
The normative comparison completely invalidates their life-changing progress.
It basically tells them they are still a failure.
Exactly. The only metric that matters is their personal baseline. Comparing them to the norm is a magnifying glass, finding flaws. Comparing them to their past self is a mirror reflecting their incredible growth.
A mirror, not a magnifying glass. I love that. But let's shift gears a bit. We've looked at the cardiovascular engine, and we've measured the body composition chassis.
Right.
But a lean body with a great resting heart rate is totally useless in the real world if it can't lift a bag of dog food out of the trunk, or if its lower back is in constant screaming agony.
Which is so common.
So we have to transition from measuring mass to measuring force. Let's look at the mechanics of movement. Muscular strength and endurance.
This is the musculoskeletal assessment. And right away, we have to distinguish between strength and endurance because they are fundamentally different biological pathways.
How do we visualize that?
The clearest way is through the 1RM chart.
Right. 1RM stands for 1 repetition maximum. It is the absolute maximum amount of weight you can lift exactly one time before your muscles fail. That is 100% of your capacity.
The chart beautifully maps the inverse relationship between the weight you're lifting and the number of repetitions you can perform.
Okay.
If you are lifting 100% of your max, you do 1 rep. If you drop the weight to 80% of your max, physiological norms dictate you should be able to grind out about 8 repetitions.
And if you go lighter,
If you drop it further to 65% of your max, you should hit around 15 reps.
and these percentages dictate the training zones. Like if you are lifting heavy weight for 1 to 5 reps, you are targeting pure neurological strength and fast twitch muscle fibers.
Yeah.
If you are lifting lighter weight for 15, 20, or 25 reps, you are building muscular endurance and capillary density.
But testing a true 1RM on a novice client is incredibly dangerous. You are asking someone with TOR mechanics to lift a load that their connective tissue has never experienced.
Sounds like a recipe for a herniated disc.
It is. So we estimate it. You have them lift a moderate weight until they hit fatigue, say an 8-rep max, and you use mathematical formulas to calculate what their 1RM theoretically would be.
But what if you don't have access to free weights? Like most field tests rely on calisthenics, right? Body weight exercises like push-ups and sit-ups.
And here we hit another massive mechanical bias. Bodyweight tests severely penalize heavier people. Think about the physics of a push-up. The resistance is your own body mass.
Oh, that makes sense. Let's look at the math. If you have a lean person who weighs 150 pounds and an overweight person who weighs 250 pounds, but both of them possess the exact same absolute muscle strength in their chest and triceps.
Right.
When the lean person does a push-up, they are lifting a fraction of their 150 pounds. When the overweight person does a push-up, they are lifting a fraction of 250 pounds.
The test is objectively harder for the heavier person. They're lifting a heavier absolute load. So using a standard push-up test as a baseline for an overweight client is just setting them up to fail.
Which is why intelligent assessment modifies the levers of the body to change the resistance without adding external weights.
Exactly.
A brilliant example of this is the 5-level sit-up test.
The biomechanics of this are so elegant. You don't need a dumbbell to make a sit-up harder. You just change where the arms are placed.
How's that work?
The easiest level might be lying on your back with your arms extended straight down toward your knees. To make it harder, you fold your arms across your chest. Harder still, you put your fingertips behind your ears.
You are shifting the center of mass. Your arms have weight. By moving that weight further away from the pivot point, which is your hips and lower back, you dramatically increase the torque on the abdominal muscles.
But assessing a sit-up isn't just about counting how many the client can do. It's about watching how they do it.
Right.
Because the body is a master compensator. If a muscle is weak, the brain will instantly recruit another muscle to get the job done. And this is perfectly illustrated by the cheating sit-up.
Oh, if you've ever been to a gym, you've seen this. A client has weak rectus abdominis muscles, the six-pack muscles.
Yeah.
They lie on the floor, and they simply don't have the strength to curl their trunk up. So what happens? Their brain says, okay, we need to get up, let's use momentum, and let's use the hip flexors.
Specifically, the psoas muscle. The psoas is a massive, incredibly strong muscle that attaches to your femur, your thigh bone, and runs deep through your pelvis to attach directly to your lower lumbar spine.
So instead of curling the spine up with the abdominals, the client arches their lower back, creating a gap between their spine and the floor, and they violently pull with their psoas.
Use their hips to yank their torso off the floor.
Yeah.
Now, technically, their shoulders came up, they completed the rep, but structurally,
using your hip flexors to do a sit-up is exactly like using a high-interest credit card to pay off your mortgage.
that is the perfect analogy.
You are getting the job done today. The bill is paid. But you are transferring massive stress to a structural system that is going to severely penalize you later.
Every single time.
Every time that psoas fires in an arched back sit-up, it tugs violently on the lumbar vertebrae. You are literally crushing your lower back just to pass a fitness test.
The assessment has to catch that compensation. The trainer must recognize that a cheating sit-up isn't a rep, it's a warning sign.
Right.
And we look for visual cues of weakness all over the body. Consider the serratus anterior push-up.
The serratus anterior is this cool, jagged-looking muscle that wraps around your rib cage. Its primary job is to hold your shoulder blade, your scapula, flat against your back.
If that muscle is weak, you will see it immediately during a push-up. As the client lowers their body toward the floor, their shoulder blade will pop up and poke out from their back. It's called a winged scapula.
It looks alien, and if a trainer sees that, they know instantly that the shoulder mechanics are compromised.
Completely.
If you load that person up with a heavy bench press, their shoulder joint is going to take all the stress because the scapula isn't stabilized.
And we can actually predict future injuries by testing specific endurance limits. The gold standard for this is the Bering-Sorensen back endurance test.
This test is brutal, but incredibly telling. You have the client lie face down on a heavy table. Their legs and hips are strapped down securely,
Okay.
but their entire upper torso from the waist up is hanging completely off the edge of the table, suspended in midair.
They have to use their lower back extensor muscles to hold their trunk perfectly horizontal, like a plank, but in reverse. The goal is to hold that static position for up to 180 seconds.
3 minutes of holding your spine perfectly straight against gravity. And what the research shows is that poor performance on this specific endurance hold is highly predictive of future lower back pain.
It is essentially a crystal ball for spinal health.
Because the back muscles are endurance muscles, they don't need to lift a car, they need to hold you upright all day long without fatiguing.
Exactly.
If they fatigue quickly, the spine compresses, the discs bulge, and pain begins.
Which flows perfectly into our next phase of assessment. Your muscles might be incredibly strong, and they might have great endurance.
Right.
But if they're tight, short, or pulling the skeleton out of alignment, the system is eventually going to break down. We have to look at flexibility and the kinetic chain.
We begin with goniometry. This is the highly precise measurement of joint range of motion in exact degrees, using a tool that looks like a giant protractor.
Let's look at the ankle, because it is the foundational shock absorber for the entire human body.
Okay, what are the benchmarks?
They're very clear. Plantar flexion, which is pointing your toes down like a ballerina, should have a healthy range of 45 to 50 degrees. Dorsiflexion, which is pulling your toes up toward your shin, should have about 20 degrees of mobility.
And why does that 20 degrees of dorsiflexion matter so much?
Imagine a client who decides to start jogging. Every time their foot strikes the pavement, kinetic energy shoots up their leg. If they have 20 degrees of dorsiflexion, their ankle joint flexes, the calf muscle elongates, and the energy is safely absorbed.
But what if they wear high heels all day or sit at a desk and their ankles are incredibly tight? They only have, say, 5 degrees of dorsiflexion.
When your foot hits the pavement, the ankle basically locks up. That kinetic force doesn't just vanish.
It has to go somewhere.
Right. It bypasses the ankle, shoots straight up the shin bone, and violently impacts the knee joint. Then it travels up the femur and smashes into the hip. A lack of mobility at the ankle manifests as chronic knee and back pain.
The body is a connected web. The pain is rarely where the actual problem is.
Exactly.
And this interconnected reality is exactly why the classic sit and reach test is heavily criticized by modern sports medicine.
We all remember the sit and reach.
Yeah.
You sit on the floor with your legs straight out, you put your hands on this little metal box, and you push a slider forward as far as you can. It's supposed to measure hamstring flexibility.
But it is critically flawed because it only gives you a final distance. It totally fails to identify where the restriction actually is. Well, you might only push the slider 2 inches, but is that because your hamstrings are short? Or is it because your lower back is totally fused and rigid? Or maybe your shoulders are so tight you can't reach your arms out properly.
The sit and reach is a blunt instrument. It tells you there is a problem, but it doesn't diagnose the weak link in the chain. To find the specific culprit, we use targeted muscle length assessments.
One of the most brilliant diagnostic tests for this is the Thomas test. It isolates the muscles of the hip with incredible precision.
Here's how it works. You have the client lie flat on their back on the very edge of a table so their legs are dangling off into the air.
Okay.
You tell them to pull one knee tightly up to their chest and hold it there. Now, as the practitioner, you aren't looking at the knee they are holding. You are watching what happens to the other leg, the one hanging off the table.
This is where the biomechanics get fascinating. The hip flexors attach the lower spine and pelvis to the femur. If the thigh of that dangling leg suddenly lifts up off the table and points toward the ceiling, you know instantly that the iliopsoas, a deep one-joint hip flexor, is pathologically tight.
But what if the thigh stays perfectly flat on the table, but the lower leg kicks out? Instead of the knee bending at 90 degrees, the leg straightens out.
That tells you a completely different story. It means the rectus femoris is tight. The rectus femoris is a quad muscle, but it is a 2-joint muscle. It crosses both the hip and the knee.
Yes.
So when you pull the pelvis back, that tight muscle pulls on the kneecap, straightening the leg. The Thomas test doesn't just tell you that your hips are tight. It tells you exactly which fibers to stretch.
And we see massive tightness in the upper body, too. We live in an era of flexion. We are constantly hunched forward over our keyboards, over our steering wheels, over our smartphones.
This posture creates an epidemic of short, tight chest muscles, the pectoralis major and minor.
It really does.
If you are sitting right now, trace a line from your sternum out to your shoulder. Those muscles spend 12 hours a day in a shortened, contracted state. And because the skeleton is a tension system, those tight chest muscles constantly pull your shoulders forward.
Which forces your upper back muscles to stretch out and weaken. It pulls your cervical spine out of alignment, leading to neck pain and tension headaches. The origin of the headache is the tight chest.
Which leads us directly into postural assessment.
Yeah.
The holy grail of the human kinetic chain is dynamic postural equilibrium.
Good posture isn't an aesthetic choice, it's an energetic one.
Mm-hmm.
Equilibrium means your skeleton is stacked perfectly so that gravity is holding you together rather than pulling you apart.
Right.
It is the ability to hold the body erect against gravity with minimal muscular effort.
If you are misaligned, say, your head is leaning 3 inches forward because you're staring at a screen, your neck muscles have to fire constantly 24/7 just to keep your head from falling onto your chest. You are leaking precious energy just standing still.
We assess this baseline using the Plumline test. You drop a string with a weight on the bottom to create a perfect vertical line of reference. You have the client stand sideways next to the string.
And if they have perfect alignment, that string should bisect very specific landmarks.
Right.
It should pass slightly in front of the ankle bone, slightly in front of the center of the knee, slightly behind the center of the hip joint, directly through the lumbar vertebrae, right through the middle of the shoulder joint, and finally straight through the mastoid process, which is that little bony bump right behind your earlobe.
Any deviation from that line, a forward head, an anterior pelvic tilt, locked knees, indicates a muscular imbalance that needs to be corrected before you load that body with heavy weights.
But we aren't statues. We don't just stand still. We have to evaluate dynamic posture. How does the machine operate in motion?
The most critical area to observe dynamically is the foot and ankle complex during a walking or light jogging gait. The practitioner gets down on the floor and watches the heels from behind.
And they are looking for pronation. When your foot strikes the ground, the arch is supposed to collapse slightly to absorb shock and then immediately stiffen back up to push off.
Yes.
But many people overpronate. Their heel rolls inward, and the arch collapses completely flat onto the floor with every single step.
If a client has severe overpronation and you prescribe them a 5-mile treadmill run to improve their cardiovascular health, you are committing malpractice.
Wow.
That collapsed foot forces the shin bone to rotate internally. That internal rotation torques the knee joint. The torqued knee joint pulls the pelvis out of alignment. You are systematically destroying their joints in the name of cardio.
You have to fix the chassis before you rev the engine. And the ultimate synthesis of all these concepts of flexibility, the strength, the posture, is found in a system called the Functional Movement Screen, or FMS.
The FMS was a massive paradigm shift in the industry. It moved away from measuring isolated joints with a protractor and instead looked at integrated whole-body movement patterns.
It consists of 7 fundamental movements. Things like a deep overhead squat, stepping over a hurdle, and an inline lunge.
Right.
It places the client in extreme demanding positions where mobility limitations and asymmetrical imbalances cannot hide. If your right hip is tighter than your left, the deep squat will reveal it instantly.
But the movements aren't the revolutionary part. The scoring system is what changed everything.
How does it work?
The FMS is scored from 0 to 3. A 3 means you performed the movement perfectly. A 2 means you completed it, but with some compensation, maybe your heels came off the floor. A 1 means you simply cannot perform the movement at all.
But a score of 0 isn't given for failing. You don't get a 0 for being weak or inflexible.
No, a 0 is given if the client experiences pain at any point during the movement.
That is profound. Pain is a hard stop. It halts the assessment immediately.
Absolutely.
It shifts the entire focus away from performance and strictly into the realm of injury prevention. If you feel pain in your shoulder during an overhead squat, the trainer doesn't say push through it. The trainer says, this assessment is over and I am referring you to a physical therapist.
The FMS acknowledges that movement should never hurt. It identifies the compensations before they turn into catastrophic, life-altering injuries.
So take a breath. Look at everything we've covered. We have lifestyle questionnaires, risk indexes, heart rate formulas, BIA machines, calipers, plumb lines, and movement screens.
It's a lot.
It is a mountain of data. The critical question for a practitioner is, how do you synthesize all of this without completely paralyzing the human being standing in front of you?
The guidelines provide 2 case studies that beautifully illustrate the art of filtering this data through a client-centered lens.
Let's look at case study 1. We have a 55-year-old male. He is moderately overweight. He has some mild blood pressure issues, but he is already doing some outdoor cycling on the weekends. His doctor told him to get more exercise, so he is highly motivated.
He is ready to work. But if you blindly follow a standard protocol, you might put him on a treadmill for a VO2 max test.
Right.
And that would be a huge mistake.
Because he is a cyclist. His muscles, his nervous system, his biomechanics are adapted to sitting on a saddle and pushing pedals. He probably hasn't run a mile in 20 years.
Exactly.
If you force him to run on a treadmill, his lack of mechanical efficiency is going to skyrocket his heart rate. His joints will hurt, the test will be invalid, and he will hate the experience.
So the practitioner adapts. They utilize a 3-stage submaximal bicycle test.
That makes perfect sense.
It is non-weight bearing, so it protects his joints. It addresses his specific cardiovascular risk factors in a controlled environment. And most importantly, it matches his actual lifestyle and the physical activity he enjoys.
It is the perfect application of validity, reliability, and economy. But case study 2 is where this philosophy truly blew my mind.
Case 2 is a 33-year-old female. Her primary stated objective is weight loss. But during the initial consultation, She makes it explicitly clear that she is highly intimidated by the gym environment and she does not want to be poked and prodded.
She is communicating massive body image anxiety. She took immense courage just to walk into the facility.
Right.
If you stick to the strict scientific protocol, if you approach her with a pair of skin-fold calipers and start pinching the fat on her triceps and her waist, she is going to experience a trauma response. She will walk out that door and never return.
So what does the client-centered approach recommend? It tells the professional to throw the calipers in the trash. You don't need them. Protect her psychological safety at all costs.
Use non-invasive measures. You measure her height and weight to get a BMI, and maybe you take a quick waist girth over her shirt.
But it goes even further. The guidelines suggest that if she has no significant cardiovascular risk factors on her PARQ plus world, you might want to skip the formal cardiovascular test entirely.
Wait, just skip the cardio test. Don't measure her engine at all.
Yes. Do not test her. Simply use a mathematical heart rate reserve calculation based on her age and resting heart rate and tell her to monitor her perceived exertion, how hard she feels she is breathing during her normal exercise routine.
I want to make sure I am understanding the gravity of this. The Gold Standard Assessment Manual is explicitly giving trainers permission to not assess.
That's exactly right.
It is stating that the most scientifically sound decision you can make is to deliberately ignore biological data to preserve the client's motivation.
Absolutely. Because what is the ultimate goal? The goal is behavioral change. If the process of measurement threatens the behavioral change, then the measurement is toxic. The science must serve the human, not the other way around.
That is incredibly powerful. As we bring this all together, we talked earlier about the human kinetic chain. The ultimate physical goal of that chain is dynamic postural equilibrium, a state of balance against the crushing force of gravity.
Right.
But looking at the entirety of this deep dive, it seems the goal of a fitness assessment is a different kind of equilibrium entirely.
It is the equilibrium between the cold, hard science of human biology and the fragile, complex psychology of the human mind. The treadmills, the calipers, the heart rate monitors, they are just tools. The true expertise lies in the empathetic interpretation and application of those tools.
An assessment should be a mirror reflecting your baseline and your potential. It is a starting line to celebrate your future growth.
Yes.
It must never be a magnifying glass used to highlight your perceived flaws. If the process doesn't leave the client feeling empowered, safe, and understood, then the assessment has fundamentally failed, regardless of how precise the data is.
A perfect summary.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought. We are living in an era of unprecedented hyperquantification.
We really are.
Millions of us are wearing smartwatches, fitness rings, and chest straps. These devices assess our resting heart rate, our sleep architecture, our blood oxygen, and our daily steps every single second of the day. They feed us an endless, overwhelming stream of biometric data.
Constant data.
But based on everything we've unpacked today, if that glowing screen on your wrist can't see you wince in pain during a lunge, if it can't notice the hesitation in your voice when you are asked about your stress levels, if it doesn't know that you are terrified of failing, are we actually becoming less assessed in the ways that truly matter?
That's a great point.
Take a hard look at the dashboard of data you track for yourself. Are you measuring what is easy, or are you actually measuring what is important?
A vital question for anyone trying to navigate their own health in the modern age.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Right.
Until next time.